I'm going to do something I have never done before from the pulpit. And why not? I mean, we've got a bishop here, the dean, an archdeacon, a former archdeacon, a canon of the diocese. So why not try something, a little experiment? I'm going to, as I read the readings for today, I discovered there were many different options on what to preach on, many different preaching paths, and I needed to choose one. So I'm going to ask you actually to help me do that. There are three options, so listen carefully. The first is, would you rather hear, number one, an explanation of the doctrine of the Trinity? Listen. All right. I was going to ask for a show of hands, but that got a lot of thumbs down, so we'll just move on to number two. The second option is a discussion of Father's Day. Think about that one. And the third, since tomorrow is the 30th anniversary of Lard and my ordination to the diaconate, how about a story taken from one of my adventures as a deacon? Wow, okay. Thank goodness, because that's the only one I prepared. Well, let's turn the clock back. Almost 30 years ago, to begin the story of my very first medical mission, this one to Guatemala, where a team of 12 healthcare professionals and laypersons worked together for 10 days in remote Mayan villages. Our new friends, supporters, and guides were a group of Guatemalan seminarians. These were the very first indigenous people who had been called to and were preparing for the priesthood in the Episcopal Church in Guatemala. And amazingly, for those days, this included several women. Every day of the mission started in the same way, about 4:30 a.m., with crowing roosters and barking dogs. The 12 missioners awoke in our one-room sleeping quarters. It was very cozy. This usually was the seminary classroom. Next, you rushed out to an icy cold outdoor shower if you were either brave or desperate. Then morning prayer for all of us, followed by a very quick breakfast, and then we piled into the van for a dusty, precarious ride to a different settlement each day where we set up our medical and dental clinics and saw hundreds of patients a day. We had nothing in common with our patients. Skin color, language, dress, education, material possessions, beliefs, religion, totally different cultures. The days were hot and the nights in the mountains were cold. Each day ended with evening prayer as we reflected on the day's events together and often with tears flowing. You see, most of us had never had any firsthand experience of extreme poverty, and at the same time had never seen such trust and hope in the eyes of people. Well, it was Saturday, the last day of our mission, and the priest, who spoke only Spanish, came to me and asked me to preach at the Eucharist the next day. This was Saturday afternoon. Now, I had been a physician for some time, so I knew how to do what we had been doing in the clinics, but I'd been a deacon for a very short time, having preached maybe just a handful of sermons. Well, yes, I had a Bible, but where was my library of commentaries? I longed for my bookshelf of preaching resources. What could I say to the priest? No was not an option. I ended up using the story of Abraham and Isaac from the Hebrew scripture appointed for that day, and my intended message was, God will provide, because God had provided so much during those 10 days. Of course, no one except for the other missioners understood a word of English. So the sermon was spoken a few sentences at a time. First by me in English, then in Spanish by the only missioner who could speak Spanish, and finally in Quiché, the language spoken by most of the people crowded into that small chapel. That sermon took a while. Longer than this one, I promise. As I looked among the faces of the listening Mayan seminarians and townspeople, all patient and polite, some smiling, some frankly puzzled, I wondered what was being said to them, what they heard, and what was being lost in translation. The important thing about that was that we were all trying our best. Everyone there was trying our best to bridge the enormous chasm between our cultures, customs, and language. And you know, I think we succeeded in some small way. Not everything was lost in translation. As I listened to Lauren read the opening words of today's gospel, Jesus said to the disciples, "I still have many things to say to you." I have to wonder why that is so. I have to wonder if that is because much of the message that Jesus gave to the world has been lost in translation over the years. I don't know about you, but I think that Jesus still does have many things to say to our world, saying words that have the power to overcome vast differences in culture, language, belief, even politics. Jesus has many things to say to us. We hear these things in the voices of the disempowered, the weak, the poor, the prisoners, the sick, in the voices of the victims of racism and violence, in the voices of the victims of sexism and ageism, in the voices of the homeless. Jesus has many things to say to us, now more than ever. We hear these things from those who, in truth, have no voice. And that raises the question for me, and I hope it does for you, who then will speak for the voiceless? That's not a rhetorical question. And I think I know the answer you expect to come from the pulpit, and I hope comes from you. Who will speak for the voiceless? It must be that we are to be the voice of Jesus in the world today. We have many things to tell the world, many things that need translation to a world that is at best apathetic and at worst antagonistic to the simple yet profound message of love and compassion embodied in us, each one of us, followers of the Jesus movement. You know, an image that is most often used for deacons, and I'm not going to put anyone back here on the spot, but they're probably thinking of this. An image most often used for deacons is that we have one foot in the world and one foot in the church. Now visualize that. What an uncomfortable position that can be, especially given the immense and growing chasm between church and world, between what the church says and what the world tells us. One foot in the church and one foot in the world. Yet, that's what we do. Deacons are called to take the gospel message of love and compassion out to the world, and to bring the needs to the world right up into our faces here as we sit in the church. That is what we do. Yet I say to you that this uncomfortable position, this call to have one foot in the church and the other in the world, is one that we all share. Bishop, priests, deacons, and most importantly, you, us, every one of us. And I think we get that here at this cathedral. I think we get that in our work for equity and social justice in Baltimore City and beyond. I think we get that in our work with refugees and immigrants. I think we get that in our work restoring and preserving the natural wonders of creation. May these works and all new other works that are emerging continue. May they thrive. Jesus said to his disciples, I still have many things to say to you. God still has many things to say. Let us hear the words. Let us speak them. If not you and I, then who? If not now, then when?